Minnesota, 1862. The Dakota people stood on the edge of despair. Their lands had been taken by treaties that promised food support and peace in return. But those promises were broken. Traders grew wealthy while Dakota families suffered in hunger. By midsummer, the crops had failed, the herds had vanished, and patience had turned to anger. The spark came on August 17th when 4 young Dakota men, desperate and lost, harmed several settlers near Acton. It was the moment that began one of the largest native uprisings in United States history. Chief Little Crow, who had warned that injustice would bring sorrow, faced an impossible choice. He knew conflict would cost lives, yet silence meant the end of his people's future. That night he stood before his warriors beneath a stormy sky and said, "You are hungry and poor. You have no choice but to fight for what is right." As dawn rose, the Dakota prepared to defend their homeland once more. By the morning of August 18, 1862, the struggle had begun. Dakota warriors moved through the Minnesota River Valley, striking at government posts and settlements built on their ancestral land. Fort Ridgely, New Ulm, and nearby towns became scenes of fierce resistance. Families fled into the forests, soldiers rushed from distant posts, and chaos swept the plains. For weeks, the fighting spread across the valley. The Dakota took hundreds of settlers and officials into custody, hoping to exchange them for peace and fair treatment. But the United States Army advanced quickly, sending thousands of troops under Colonel Henry Sibley. Once a man of friendship, Sibley now led the campaign against the very people he had promised to protect. Little Crow's leadership kept his warriors together, but they were outnumbered and poorly supplied. The United States forces had artillery and endless reinforcements. The Dakota had only their courage, their unity, and their knowledge of the land. By late September, their villages burned. Hunger and sorrow returned again. On September 23, 1862, the Dakota resistance ended at the Battle of Wood Lake. The United States Army captured hundreds of men, women, and children. What followed was not peace, but punishment. More than 300 Dakota men were taken into custody and placed on trial. Many did not understand English. Their hearings lasted only minutes. There were no lawyers, no witnesses, and no mercy. Within weeks, 303 men were condemned. President Abraham Lincoln personally reviewed the cases and approved 38 sentences after careful examination. On December 26, 1862, in the town of Mankato, Minnesota, a large platform was built. Thousands of settlers gathered as the Dakota prisoners sang their final songs of courage and faith. When the signal came, silence fell across the crowd. It became the largest group punishment in United States history. Their remains were hidden from their families, and the Dakota people were forced from Minnesota, their homeland declared forbidden. After the tragedy, the surviving Dakota were sent away to distant places. Some were taken to harsh lands in South Dakota and Nebraska. Others disappeared in the struggle for survival. The Minnesota River Valley, once full of life and laughter, became quiet, haunted by memories of what had been lost. Yet their stories did not vanish. Generations later, descendants of those who suffered began to speak again. They remembered Little Crow, who fell in 1863 while gathering berries with his son. They remembered the mothers who walked for miles through the snow, and the children who carried songs of hope so their people would not be forgotten. The Great Sioux Uprising was more than a conflict. It was a cry for dignity, for justice, and for broken promises to be remembered. The full truth of what happened in 1862 remains a wound on the nation's conscience. So today we must ask ourselves, was it resistance or survival? What would you have done if your children were hungry and your world was being taken away? Comment your thoughts and subscribe at History TV for more Native history.